mineral accretion and coral gardening at Agincourt Reef in the Great Barrier Reef, and Kailash is from the University of Queensland. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Kailash Cook. I'm an undergrad student at the University of Queensland, and today I'm going to be presenting some work that I did very recently, implementing mineral accretion and coral gardening at Agincourt Reef just offshore Port Douglas. Before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and sea country where we were working for this project, the Agincourt people, and I'd like to pay my deepest respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. It was such a great honor to work on such beautiful sea country throughout this project. I'd also like to acknowledge Nathan Cook, who was the leader of this project, and without his dedication and perseverance, this project would not have been possible. And he was meant to be here today, but due to some logistical issues, he is still over in the Middle East working for KAUST. And we are both reef stewards because we live and breathe coral reefs. And nothing brings us more pride and joy than to watch a degraded reef ecosystem be restored to a thriving community. And this project exemplifies that pride very well. So in 2017, Nathan and I were working with Reef Ecologic, and we were contracted by Quicksilver to help restore this very localized area of rubble, which they identified just offshore their pontoon at Agincourt Reef. And this was a very unique opportunity because it was very close to some very high-level infrastructure that we don't often see on these outer reefs, and the rubble area was quite small and surrounded by very healthy coral reef on pretty much all sides. So we went through a decision-making process and decided that this was a cool opportunity to implement a very novel restoration method and first of its kind for the Great Barrier Reef. This slide makes it look pretty normal. We started off with 6 frames, 1.5 by 3 meters, and we arranged them all over this rubble pile, and we also left 3 control areas that we could use to compare our results. And onto these frames, we planted 48 fragments of 5 to 10 centimeters in length. From memory, there were 6 species, 4 acroporas, and 2 montiparous species. And then, onto 3 of these frames, we decided to implement the mineral accretion technology. Now, this mineral accretion technology has only been tried a couple of times, and it works through the process of electrolysis. So bear with me while I take you on a little bit of simple electrochemistry for the next couple of minutes. So in the ocean is this big soup of minerals that organisms utilize to their advantage all the time. There's a lot of water, a lot of calcium, a lot of magnesium, and this all interplays with atmospheric concentrations as well. Pretty much all of us here probably come across this reaction at some point in our careers. This is the process of ocean acidification, but also the process of carbonate deposition into the ocean. The way it works is that carbon dioxide dissolved from the atmosphere reacts with water and creates carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid is really interesting because it has 2 hydrogen atoms attached to it. So it has to undergo 2 processes of hydrogen dissociation before it's gotten rid of all its hydrogen ions, leaving calcium carbonate. And this leads to quite a bit of hydrogen ions being present in the water, and we are more familiar with this as the lowering of pH. And these hydrogen ions exert a pressure against these equilibrium reactions, which often result in this 3rd step of the reaction, the most important one that creates calcium carbonate, not occurring very frequently. And this is a big problem for every organism that uses calcium carbonate to build solid structures, coral in particular. So the way mineral accretion works is we put in an electrolytic cell and apply a voltage And one very simple reaction occurs at the cathode that changes the game for coral growth. And it's this one here, if the thing wants to work. There we go. It gives these hydrogen ions, these things that are making the water more acidic, enough energy to react together and to bubble away as hydrogen gas. And then this has a chain reaction effect, which means that the hydrogen ions disappear, which means there's no more pressure up against the equilibrium reaction, which means that calcium carbonate flows into the water column much more frequently than it would normally. So much so that around the cathode, we see that solid calcium carbonate literally precipitates onto the cathode. And the idea with this is that because it's so much easier for corals to produce their calcium carbonate skeletons, they can devote more resources toward things like being more thermally tolerant or dealing with disease and predation and all that sort of stuff. And this has had very good success stories being present, particularly in Thailand and in Indonesia. So for our project, after a year of implementing this mineral accretion, you can see that there's a nice little layer of calcium carbonate, and you can even see where that arrow's pointing. There's some of those hydrogen bubbles bubbling away. But this photo does also show that the coral cover isn't looking too good after a year with current flowing through these frames. And that was the biggest problem that we found. So after a year where we would expect to see some substantial coral growth, we found that there was no significant difference in live coral cover, and actually there was on average a decrease in live coral cover on the treatments that were powered. So in 2019, as this was a tourism-based, where aesthetics were in mind as a goal, we decided that this wasn't going to work in the time frame that Quicksilver wanted, so we unfortunately had to stop the electrolysis experiment. We also still had a collecting permit active, so we tried to plant some more corals onto the frames to replace these colonies that had died, and we also made them a little bit bigger than previously to try and kickstart this coral growth. And as you can see through the rest of the experiment, coral cover was as we'd expect for a very healthy reef. Once we finally stabilized that rubble and we got those corals attached, it just took off. Some of the statistics that we used to prove these results, we collected results via random point sampling, so we used a mixed linear model, and we treated before and after the intervention as two separate experiments. So you can see before there was no real significant results, whereas after we had insane levels of live coral cover, which translated to exactly what we were contracted to do. This reef is still growing to this day, and it is one of the highest increases of coral cover that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. The only sour taste that this project is leaving in my mouth is that we never really worked out why the mineral accretion didn't work. Now, I really believe that this technology has the potential to be very groundbreaking in the coming future with the increased impacts of climate change and so forth. I've seen this effect. When this is done properly, corals are much more resilient, grow much faster, and are much more vibrant in color. In this situation, though, we have attributed it down to two things. We think that because it was a bit hard to get the appropriate personnel, such as electricians and divers, to go out and monitor all the circuitry and stuff that we had running off the pontoon. The pontoon's also solar powered, so we think that that might have had some interplay here. We think that the voltage was fluctuating, and that has never really been tested to this day, but we have had anecdotal evidence that fluctuating voltage makes it relatively stressful for the coral, because it means that all of a sudden calcium is really easy to accrete, and then all of a sudden it's not. And the other reason that we think this might have happened was because the coral fragments we planted were very small, and we do think that once we put those bigger fragments, they had enough resilience to be able to start facilitating their own growth more effectively. We did also find that the mineral accretion technology did help to stabilize the rubble more effectively than the frames that didn't have mineral accretion attached to them. So there is potential for this process to be used to help probably in areas where the rubble is a little bit looser than the stuff we see here, but in areas where the rubble is really silty, really loose, and really fine, we might be able to use this to help cement that rubble into place and allow for more easily restored, localized reef interventions. But ultimately, with this project, the coral gardening in tandem with substrate stabilization through the use of steel mesh was the most effective, and we took the mean coral cover across all treatments and control sites from less than 5% to a mean of 75% live coral cover across both the treatments where we planted coral, with a mean of 14% live coral cover in the control areas. And we reckon a lot of that live coral cover in the control was due to spillover from the treatment sites. And all of this was recently published in Ecological Management and Restoration last year, and it was a really big pleasure to put this out into the scientific community. And we hope that this can be replicated in an area where we can get the appropriate personnel and try and get the results of mineral accretion on the Great Barrier Reef as we have seen throughout the rest of the world. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to Reef Ecologic and Quicksilver for helping support this project. And yes, I'm open for any questions.
I'm sure we've got questions. Any questions in the room? None online. Thank you for checking. Yes.
Hey, thanks. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you for honestly going over the challenges that you've had. I feel like people are often afraid of saying what hasn't worked. But you said it's been used overseas. So, of course, tourism industry is hard, as you said, because they're looking for the quick coral growth and that return on effort. But do you know what industries it's been used in collaboration with overseas, like maybe hotel industries that are close to the water?
You do raise a very good point. It has mostly been used with tourism industries, but it has also mostly been used on fringing reefs, which we actually connect them up to the grid overseas, which we thought we'd be able to. We had solar power, but we also had backup diesel generators on the pontoon, which it actually turns out they never ended up using the backup diesel generators to keep it running. So it was something that we thought we could overcome with this project, but of course just all these logistics compounded on top of each other, and it was still worth a good shot. Like I said, I do think it could be replicated on a setup such as this, just with a little bit tighter management, and now with the hindsight of being able to focus our attention into what's more, what's important.
Thank you, Kailash. And this is from the online person. What potential do you believe there is or will be to link electrolysis tech to offshore or similar projects compared to ports and coastal infrastructure?
Let me think about that for a second. Can you just repeat the last part of that question again, sorry?
What potential do you believe there is to link electrolysis to offshore or similar projects compared to ports and coastal infrastructure?
Well, that obviously comes with the challenges, as I just stated, where we don't have that infrastructure in place to provide appropriate current to these offshore reefs. But I do think that there is potential in place, especially with areas such as these pontoons, where we can maybe with the addition of some smaller infrastructure, but also with the increasing efficiency of renewables as well, such as solar. And I've also heard in the Gillies they've been trying to implement using tides to help power this. That's still in press as far as I'm concerned, and no results have been released, but that is a project that is happening, and if we can get that working, we'll provide a good method of transitioning from coastal to offshore reef ecosystems with this technology.
Thank you. Thank you for the collaboration and making sure we've got questions from our online audiences in the room today. Thank you. Thanks again, Kailash. Great presentation. Join with me in thanking Kailash.